I have to admit, in some ways, that was harder than my other issues, my other surgeries, because it was so visible. To me, there is this piece of when you get sick or when you have autoimmune conditions where you become embarrassed by your body failing you. And I had to learn a lot of self-compassion, and that's been part of my journey with the whole self-care.
Cue music. Places, everybody places. We're starting in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Autoimmune Hour, where we look at the rise of autoimmune disorders. I've brought together top experts that range from doctors, specialists, nutritionists, researchers, and even those recovering from autoimmune to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information about autoimmunity and how to live your life uninterrupted.
Thank you for joining us here on the Autoimmune Hour with Sharon Sayler. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio. Now, we don't want you to worry about taking too many notes, so you can join the Autoimmune Hour's Courage Club, and we'll send you the transcripts and show notes from every episode. Sign up now at understandingautoimmune.com. Now, back to your host, Sharon Sayler.
On to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com. And as always, it's my pleasure and honor to be with you here again on another brand new episode. We've got a fascinating topic that's in a way near and dear to my heart because it's about how do we thrive during not only the autoimmune, but now pandemic and all sorts of other things, economic chaos, things like that. How do we thrive during times like this? Tonight I have Andrea Miller. She is the CEO of The Digital Patient, an internationally recognized expert in patient experience, engagement, and caregiving. She also specializes in enhancing behavioral health and well-being and the related use of digital health technologies. She's consulted with leading health organizations such as Siemens Health and Teniers. That's a good word. Yeah, the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, the CDC and the UN Refugee Agency, and the New York City Department of Health, as well as numerous health tech startups, and has written for the UN, Entrepreneur.com, and Thrive Global, plus many, many others. She has a much longer bio, but we'll get into talking about her own series of personal health crises and then her own experience in being a caregiver. She's seen both sides of this. So welcome, Andrea, to the show.
Thanks, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I think this is a really important topic, especially now. Oftentimes, we're having to take family members out of care situations and being in home care as well as taking care of our own health. But you have a very fascinating story of how it became very personal for you. I know you've been doing patient engagement for a while, but what happened when it really hit home?
You know, it's a funny thing, Sharon. I was the daughter of a patient. My father had his first near-death experience when I was 7. He almost died again when I was 13. And, with the help of modern medicine, he was in and out of hospitals for most of my adult life. And it's a very funny thing when you become the person in the bed. And all of a sudden, I became that person in the bed, and I was dealing not only with my own health crises, but also my parents. I had moved back to the U.S. I was living in Geneva and had my first surgery, which was just a minor knee surgery, at least that's what I thought it was. And then I came back to the U.S. when my mother was diagnosed with an incurable form of cancer called mesothelioma. And at the same time, I found out that my knee was actually referral pain from my hips. And I had been living with hip dysplasia my whole life and had no cartilage in my hips. And within a year, I went from being healthy, active, and doing everything I wanted to do to not being able to walk a city block. And it was just absolutely horrifying and awful. And I had tried all sorts of things to stop it, but I think the stress and everything that was going on in my life, plus what was underlying, just was too much. And so I was dealing with my own surgeries while dealing with my mother's care. We were going for chemotherapy, going for radiation, and unfortunately she didn't make it. And, I recovered from that, but about 2 years later, one night I got hit by a car crossing the street, and all sorts of crazy circumstances behind that we can get into possibly through this conversation, but I wound up having a very extensive neck surgery. And at the same time, my father, who surprisingly, surprised all doctors, was still around but by himself, and we were dealing with his care. And I was literally going to assisted living places with a neck brace on, looking for a place for him. And we were just trying. I was with my brother and sister trying to juggle dealing with his care and also dealing with the patient experience of my father while dealing with my own recovery. And we can get into the details of what it's like to be a patient, but there's such a difference from being the person beside the bed, from being the person in the bed. And I just didn't realize what I needed to do for myself, let alone, how I would manage what I needed to do for them at the same time.
Well, I think that's critically important, especially now. We're bringing a lot of family members into our home to take care of them and understanding the difference and how important self-care is. You had mentioned the stress of taking care of family members, and there is so much research, as you know, there's so much research out there about how stress plays into the viability or the robustness of our immune system. And so after these surgeries and your recoveries and everything, you actually did develop a couple of autoimmune diseases, right?
Yeah. Well, I had one. I had Raynaud's, but, it was just something I lived with when it got cold, and, my fingers would turn white, and that was part of it. But then about a year after my neck surgery, I noticed a small white spot on my arm, and I had just started working again. And that was a big deal for me because I had been out of work for a considerable amount of time because it was a long recovery. And that white spot grew. And it just grew and grew and grew. And it turned out to be vitiligo. And I have to admit, in some ways, that was harder than my other issues, my other surgeries, because it was so visible to me. And there is this piece of when you get sick or when you have autoimmune conditions where you become embarrassed by your body failing you. And I had to learn a lot of self-compassion, and that's been part of my journey with the whole self-care piece too. I have become a meditator, and I also am very, very involved in terms of functional medicine, just my self-care in terms of my diet, in terms of getting enough exercise. Before COVID, I was getting considerable body work to deal with all the other things going on with me. And yes, the mind-body connection, it goes both ways. If you're not feeling well, you're going to be stressed out. And when you're stressed out, it does weaken your immune system and does cause a number of conditions that people don't talk about.
One of the things when we first met, we chatted about, and I think we were both nodding our heads in sort of sisterly agreement, was this idea of, with a lot of things, unlike vitiligo, when we walk down the street, people just assume you're just fine. And we were talking about that. I know vitiligo is much more visible than the majority of autoimmune conditions. Some for me, walking down the street now, we're all in masks, and it's a fascinating experience right now, a fascinating reality.
Yeah.
But that's showing that we're all vulnerable. Yet a huge swath of the population was already walking around quite vulnerable before the pandemic. So let's talk a little bit about your insights that you had during this time of, you looked fine on the outside.
Yeah, that has been such a strange dichotomy. And I want to be fine. When my hips failed me, and I was a very early hip replacement surgery patient, it was traumatizing to me because, there is this stigma of, what's wrong with me? How did my body fail me? Why did my body fail me? And there was a part of me that wanted to hide it. That wanted to say, I am fine, despite, these massive scars in both hips and one down the back of my neck. If you look at me, I look fine, but if you look closely, you'll see I walk with a limp and I can't turn my head, and I have all these other things that come with, having your body out of whack. And so that is that funny thing of, you want people to think you're fine, because in our society, there's so little room for not being fine. But I also want to scream at the top of my lungs, I'm not fine. This is awful. You should try living in this body. And no, you just keep going on. And quite honestly, I also knew at a certain point that I couldn't have, I allowed myself, particularly with the neck, I allowed myself occasional pity parties is what I would call them, because it was awful. And that's the reality of it. But I also know that I needed to be positive and I needed to take control of my healing and my feeling better. And there is that relationship between, your positivity and negativity and your ability to heal. There's been studies on that too. So it's a very funny topic. Yeah. Looking fine on the outside and not feeling fine in the inside. And how do you manage that around people who don't want to hear that you're not feeling well? Get tired of your story. And there's so many pieces to it. I could go on for hours about that.
Yeah, they get tired of your story. And I often wonder if that's not a part of my own story, meaning maybe they're not tired, but I'm tired and I don't want to burden them again, because then they'll feel. And I think the other thing, part of that is the caregiver thing. And I know this comes from love, but it's a fascinating thing, is that sometimes when you open up to someone dear to you about, like, oh my gosh, it's really tough right now. And it feels good to have that cathartic release. And yet oftentimes in my own world, they'll want to help me more than I really want them to help. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but you'll start getting articles about the latest research as if you haven't done that yourself, or you'll just like over caring versus the appropriate amount of caring. And I think these are all interesting questions because they're different for everybody. Somebody would appreciate more care, and other people be respectful of boundaries and don't want to burden somebody. So let's talk a little bit about your own experience, because you've been a caregiver multiple times as well as caring for yourself. This idea of, I'll call it boundaries, I guess is the only word that comes to my mind.
And I'll have to admit, as you were saying that, I was thinking, oh, I'm that person. I used to do that with my father after he had congestive heart failure. That was his final illness. And, and I used to be very overweight. I used to be clinically obese, and I've become very involved in nutrition. And I immediately started looking at, his diet and, dealing with his loneliness because he wasn't eating, but he was eating too much salt. And I became that person who was, sending too much information and wanting to make them feel better. And I realized, this is his life. And the best thing I could do for him is just be there and to listen and to show up and find out what he needs. And that, I guess, is what we all want on some level anyway. And because often we just don't even know what we need when you get in these situations. I never expected to be this person. I mean, ask anyone in my family. I mean, I was the last person you would think that would, be so health conscious and also have all these things go wrong. And it's almost comical sometimes when I start listing off all the things that are wrong with me because I am healthy. But it is a hard balance to know what to say and do. And also with my mother, you want them to get well. You don't like seeing people suffer. We never like seeing people suffer, particularly the people we love. And sometimes you just have to just stop. And it took me a while, but I just finally learned to ask them what they needed as opposed to what I needed to do for them.
Right. And you referenced it a little bit. Sometimes we don't even know what we need. And that's the idea of, for me, if I ask the question of how can I help or what do you need, sometimes it really becomes what do you want more than what do you need. Because in my heart I might think, you need to change your diet, you need to do this, you need to do that. I mean, it all worked for me, so why won't it work for you? You go through this whole sort of thing like, well, if I can do it, you could do it kind of thing, right? And I've had to stop and say, well, this person, they know what a good diet looks like. They're just not wanting to do it. And me coming to terms with understanding what they need, in my mind, might be completely different from what they want. And that's something that I've had to come to terms with, of like, just kind of, okay, they're an adult and we've had one discussion or whatever, and I realize that they're consciously aware, and this really then comes down to wants and not needs. So I got to
No,
back up.
yeah, no, you're so right. And that's actually becoming a question that providers, healthcare providers, are finally starting to ask in terms of treatment. What matters to the patient? What do you want? What do you want your life to look like? Is this the right treatment for you? It's still not quite there, but, if I had, my neck surgery happened so quickly because of the circumstances. But if my doctor would have asked me, what do I want? I want to turn my head. Of course I didn't want to be paralyzed, but, there were alternatives that I could have tried. And unfortunately, just because of the circumstances, that didn't happen. But it is an important question, as you say, what matters to that person? What do they want? And as somebody who's made and continues to make some bad health choices, despite knowing as much as I know, we're human, and, we don't always do what's best for us. We keep trying, and I ask for support when I want support. And for the most part, I am really good, but, that's not always.
I think we can all put our hand up for that. Not always. Yeah. There are many times where I've had it. And just on the basic level, for me, gluten gives me massive, I'll say it feels like a sinus headache to me. It's not a migraine. Some people say it feels that way to them, but for me, it feels like a massive sinus infection. And yet, early on, a couple of times of being put into bed for 24 to 36 hours to recover, I learned quickly, okay, no, I cannot cheat and have that piece of birthday cake. But part of me knew when I took the bite of the birthday cake, like, oh, I'll probably get a little headache, and then, oh my gosh, that wasn't so little. So sometimes my body has a way of reminding me, for whatever reason, of these things. We talked a little bit about the doctors, and I found that you really have to search out the right team. Yeah, I think we spoke to this when we first met too, this idea of having a team that is open to what you want versus what you need. And the idea of being able to talk to healthcare professionals and really make sure that you found the right fit for you. So what are some things you learned on your healthcare journey about talking to healthcare professionals?
I had some really bad experiences where they just didn't listen to me. They weren't talking to me at all. And I've also had some experiences where I thought they were talking to me, but when the outcome wasn't what I wanted and wasn't what they expected, they shut down, because ego is a very interesting thing for all of us. But the other thing I've learned, because I've done a lot of research just in general in terms of healthcare and the implications of that patient-doctor experience, I had two doctors for both of my surgeries who were extremely experienced, best in their fields in some regards, but they hadn't had much experience doing what they did to me. My hips I had done from the front, which was pretty new at the time. So while he had done all these things, he really hadn't done that much. And you want to have somebody who has had a tremendous amount of experience doing whatever it is that you need done.
Not just an experienced surgeon, you're saying, not just experienced,
exactly.
And the exact surgery that's been recommended for you.
And the thing is, until AI becomes more plentiful and better at what it needs to do, they're basing all their decisions on their past experience. They have medical school, and then it's their training, and they talk about that. Now they're doing a lot of training with VR and other ways to get, particularly for surgeries, to find out the best way of doing it, to become more skillful at doing it. And if you think about it, you obviously want the person who has done it the most times successfully, and you want to know, what their success rate is. You want to know, how well they are able to do that surgery. But then again, going back to the all human thing, we are all human. We also want them, and you and I talked about this a little bit, to some degree we want surgeons, doctors to be demigods. We want them to be very human, because this is the most vulnerable, at least for me, I have ever been. You're just so scared that something's going to go wrong, and what has already gone wrong. But you also want them to be, infallible. So you want them to be godlike in that regard. And that's a hard space for doctors. I have finally, it took me a while, but I finally learned compassion for doctors, and that was before COVID, because they've just, I can't get over what some of our healthcare providers are doing, but you need to be heard. I mean, you need a compassionate conversation. You need empathy. Being shut down within your own care is a horrible feeling.
It is. And I've had two experiences. One was a while ago after a particular car accident trauma. And I remember asking the surgeon, they recommended a specific surgery. And to me, it just sounded very, very scary. I just, no. And my question was, would you do this on your wife? And he said, no. I said, okay, that's my answer then. Thank you very much. I'll learn to cope.
Yeah. But the hard thing is, I mean, you were smart enough and present enough to ask that question during that. But I know when, after after I got hit by the car, and I had two prominent surgeons tell me I needed surgery immediately or I could be paralyzed. You want to just surrender. You want somebody else to make that decision for you. And one of the things you and I talked about was the need to sometimes have somebody else in the room who's a calmer influence. And I used to do that for my parents, quite honestly, because either they wanted to be good patients or seen as good patients, or they couldn't remember, but, either I or one of my siblings would go with them just to make sure the right questions were asked and that, the information was given. So the doctors
and the right information was heard. I know I remember when I got my first autoimmune diagnosis, the word was really big, dermatomyositis. Never heard of it, didn't know what it meant, nothing. I mean, other than what, my ears went closed, I swear. I know they kept on talking, but sort of like that Peanuts cartoon where the teacher's going, wow, wow, wow. Mm. I don't think I heard much after that. I mean, I remember leaving the office and starting to figure out, how do I spell that so I can Google it? Because the ears went closed. That's why I think you need other people who are passionate about you, but dispassionate about the questions and outcomes so they can hear what's been said.
No, I completely agree. And I didn't do that, quite honestly. I had this notion, that I could handle it myself. This was how I was raised. This was who I was. And as we talked about a little bit, it's part of my journey. I mean, one of the best things I learned was to actually ask for help within this whole process. But I couldn't do that for myself. I was doing it for other people, but somehow I didn't make the connection that I needed that same kind of help in the room with me. I had to be brave. I had to be strong. And I think I would have benefited from having somebody else in the room.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. I think we can all go, yep, I can help other people. But when I ask for help, that's where it's a little tough. We need to take a quick commercial break, Andrea. We'll be right back. And everyone, think about that. I think it's a powerful idea of asking for help. And we're going to circle back around that because I really want to talk about that. We'll be right back.
Life Interrupted Radio will return after these messages from our sponsors. It's great sponsors like these that keep this show coming to you every week. Be sure and stop by lifeinterruptedradio.com to learn more.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Listen and imagine. It takes 5 seconds to send a text, and for those 5 seconds, you're driving blind. life is worth more than a text. Stay alive. Don't text and drive.
Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org, a message brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Project Yellow Light, Noise, and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Sharon, and of course you know me from here on the Autoimmune Hour. Maybe you don't know I'm also an author. My latest book is for kids. It's Pinky Chenille and the Rainbow Hunters, a winner of a 5-star Reader's Favorite review. It's perfect for your early reader and a great bedtime story for your young adventurers. Check it out over at pinkychenille.com. That's PinkyChenille.com. See you there. Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com. And before we had to take that break, we were talking about this really important topic of asking for help and this idea of I'm brave, I'm strong, I don't want to be seen different. We've covered all of these things with Andrea Miller. She's the CEO of The Digital Patient and an internationally recognized expert in patient experience, engagement, and caregiving. And what drives her is her own work and her own experiences, as you've been hearing, because she's sharing all around the world, including under this time of pandemic, about this idea of being prepared and all of the things that she learned. And if I may be so bold saying that now she looks back with hindsight, she might have done a little bit differently. So let's talk about this idea of asking for help, Andrea.
Yeah, I just think it's something that came very, very hard to me. It wasn't something that I learned growing up. I didn't feel like I could go to people for help. And so when everything happened, I literally had to. And it was one of the hardest things I had to do. When I had my neck surgery, I had a 4-way fusion in my neck, which is big. As my doctor said, Andrea, that's a big surgery. And he was right. And I literally couldn't pick up anything more than 5 pounds or could have pulled out a screw. I have 8 screws in my neck now. And so I really needed support. And I was living in a 4th floor walk-up. And my sister said to me, yeah, exactly. And I hadn't even thought about that, to be honest with you, because I was so busy trying to process what was going on because it was such a shock to me. And my sister said, you cannot stay there. She said, there's no way after the surgery you can be there. And so I wound up camping out in my sister and brother-in-law's den for 7 weeks. And I was on heavy-duty pain meds and wearing a neck brace and also at the same time dealing with my father's caregiving, because right before I went into the hospital, he went into the hospital. And it was just, it was insane. It was absolutely insane, but it was so important for me to have people around to support me. There was no way I was going to get through it by myself. And that is another one of the lessons I learned. You just don't think about what happens afterwards sometimes.
And for how long afterwards either.
Yes, exactly.
I had this mentality, which because that had been my life before, so you get something like a cold, 10 days, get something like the flu, couple of weeks, and you're fine. And that's not my experience now. I mean, I'm quite well on my own for optimizing a lot at this time, but I think every autoimmune patient knows you have those times when there's a flare or something else. It's not unusual to have more than one autoimmune condition and all of a sudden be surprised when another autoimmune condition pops into the mix. And I think that's hard to ask for help because sometimes I felt like I'd used up all my coupons. I mean, it's like, oh no, not again. I just had to ask for help from them last year. Kind of thing. And that's very humbling. It's hard to do, especially I know you're a CEO of your company. I am of mine, and both very driven to succeed and be of service to people and really make a presence. And it's really hard to know, get to that point of being able to ask for help. I want to encourage people to do that. So do you have some tips on how you kind of get past yourself?
Well, it's funny you say that because one of the things I've come to, one of the places I've come to, and, I've been doing a lot of research on self-compassion. And part of the whole mix, too, is in asking for help, you're actually giving to the other person. I mean, if you think about our role as caregivers, when we've had to do that, it's made me feel like I hate to say it, because it's very narcissistic to some degree, but it made me feel like a better person to be able to help my parents, to be able to help my friends. And by asking others for help, you're actually giving them a gift in a sense. And there is research on this also in terms of positivity and happiness. When you're actually being kind to others, doing things for others, you feel better. And this is not just me saying it. There's actual research on this. So, there is that piece of it. But just in general, I think we need to stop beating up on ourselves. There's all the research on self-compassion. We don't talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves. We are much harder on ourselves than we are on other people. And would you tell a friend, no, I can't help you? You would be there in a heartbeat to help them if something went wrong. And there's just something in our mindset that just says, no, not me, I can't ask. And so I said this to you earlier. I mean, it was really one of the gifts that I got throughout all this, was the ability to actually ask for help and to understand what it meant to ask for help when other people asked me for help, and to be more empathetic and just, it's been an incredible gift for me. It's really changed my life to be able to do that.
I'm hoping that's one of the gifts in hindsight we're able to say about the pandemic. I'm just really hoping that will be a mind shift in people about the need for community, the need for being able to come together, the need for caregiving at all levels. I just want to say a more compassionate, empathetic understanding. I don't want to sound too airy-fairy, but for me, I'm hoping that that's one of the silver linings of everything that we're all going through.
No, I agree. We've talked about this a little bit. The whole mental health piece. There is nobody who has not been impacted about this. If they say they are not impacted, then they're in denial. I mean, it's touched everyone's lives. It's just a matter of how much it's touched their lives. And we do have this societal view of how we should be, that we should be strong and we should do everything ourselves. And, it's this very individualistic tendency. But the fact is, as human beings, we're hardwired for connection and community. And we don't feel whole. I mean, there's the whole epidemic of loneliness that was even going on before this. And I think isolation has taught us that we need to connect. And, people are doing it on Zoom now more than ever. But it's so important. So I think it has to circle back, change the discussion, how we talk about our mental and physical health, because they're interconnected. And, if you want to just take it from a business perspective, if your employees aren't feeling their best, either mentally or physically, they're not doing their best at work. And they're certainly not being their best at home. And we cannot compartmentalize every aspect of our lives, no matter how much we try.
I think that's very true. We've tried, and all of a sudden this has brought it up. Everything has been narrowed down. And when we narrow down, the focus can change. I think that's the critical thing for me. We need to take one final quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Andrea some more about our wellness and the tips she has for thriving and optimizing ourselves every day. So we'll be right back.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Change and growth are part of natural life and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for inspired conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Research shows we apologize up to 10 times a day, and most of the time, we say sorry as a response to someone else's mistake. What if we thanked people instead of all that unnecessary apologizing? So instead of saying, sorry, I'm rambling, you say, thank you for listening. Join us at projectforgive.com, a free, non-religious resource on global forgiveness.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Sayler from SharonSayler.com, and tonight we're here with Andrea Miller. She's the CEO of The Digital Patient, and she's an internationally recognized expert in patient experience, engagement, and caregiving. She has an amazing bio, which you can read on our show page, but I want to jump in because it's critically important that one topic that I have not yet covered on the show, and I want to get Andrea's perspective on it. She has a long history in understanding this, and this is the idea of a recovery plan. Now, not only does she talk about a recovery plan in her work, but I'll call it a pre-recovery plan. When you're able to see it coming. Now, oftentimes there's certain things like with my autoimmune condition, maybe I should have seen it coming because there were some things that I was ignoring and or was given a different label for. But this idea of the pre-recovery, if you see it coming, but definitely a recovery plan afterwards. So Andrea, let's talk about this idea of planning for these types of things, because I think a lot of people are, I'll say, in denial about like, oh, why do I want to do that? That might manifest it or something about like.
And I can understand it, Sharon. You know, what I went through with my hips, you know, I found out that I had almost no cartilage in my hips. And I tried everything I could not to have the surgery. And I changed my diet. I was seeing this, he called himself a Russian healer, and I would just get these massages that were so painful. And I was going to the physical therapist, and it was just taking up so much time and energy, and it was still getting worse. And so I knew I had to have the surgery. I mean, it got to the point where I couldn't walk. And I had to wait until this was in 2014, or 2013 into 2014. So I had to wait for the ACA to kick in, so my pre-existing condition was no longer an issue. And so I had time. And I literally couldn't walk a city block, but I had to plan everything. And I would go, and I'd go swimming several days a week. And I had changed my diet at that point. You know, had gone gluten-free and reduced the sugar and done all these things to reduce inflammation, and also looked into the right supplements to help healing. Granted, I have to admit I was a little extreme, and not everyone has to take it to the extent that I have, or I did. But I do know that after my surgery, and I had bilateral hip replacements, which if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done them both at the same time. But I did them both at the same time, and I was up and walking within days, and my recovery was quite fast. And one of the things I did learn is never have any kind of replacement surgery in the middle of winter, because you don't want to fall. So I was trapped in the house most of the winter. I wasn't thinking, but it was a lesson learned, so you can include that. But I did have a pretty speedy recovery. I was off the pain meds within a couple of days. I went back to the doctor's office, and they said, do you need more? I said, no, I haven't finished what you've given me, because I didn't need it. And it was a very easy recovery, unlike my neck, which, you know, who expects to get hit by a car? And it turned out to be a very big surgery. It's kind of like our autoimmune conditions. You don't see it coming. And that was a really long recovery. It took me about a year. And I was on pain meds, heavy-duty pain meds, for almost 8 weeks, living in a neck brace for 3 months. I mean, it was horrible. And I went into that surgery without truly knowing what was going to happen, and had a horrible experience in the ER, where I found out in the ER what they were actually going to, in the pre-op, you know, just before they were taking me in. And I almost jumped and left the hospital. I mean, but I knew I was risking being paralyzed. So the difference between being a prepared patient and being a terrified patient was quite big. And so I did do this kind of pre-training before I went in, and it helped me. It helped my mindset. I was calmer. I was better able to handle it by the time, it actually did happen. It made a difference. At least I think it made a difference. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. Sometimes it's what you believe that matters most.
Absolutely. But you talked also about keeping records and keeping tracks of things and how that can help in your recovery plan. And I have to agree, because there's so many times recently I've got several notebooks where I've put things, because you'll never forget this. This is a big moment in your life. You'll never forget it. And I was filling out a form the other day, and I was like, now what year was that? So,
I don't know about you, but I do kind of live my life according to before surgery and after surgery. And, that's how I know what year it was. Oh, yeah, that's when I had the surgery. Okay, that's, it's just, it changed. When these big things happen, it kind of changes your perspective on everything. But I do keep track of it. And I journal. I write now. I do a lot of things now that I never did before. And I think it's helped me as in terms of my healing, and also as a person, I'm better able to handle the stress that comes. Quite honestly, COVID, while it's awful, I had already been in isolation for, periods of time with both my surgeries. And so I kind of knew how to handle it to some degree. And nobody knows how to handle this, but I was more prepared for it mentally than I think a lot of people, because with my neck, I was afraid to leave the house. I couldn't.
I've heard that from numerous autoimmune patients, where jokingly it's sort of like, well, welcome to my world. Yeah. It sounds a little rude, but I think a lot of us who have autoimmune issues are used to like, okay, there's the flu going around, there's whatever going around. I think I'll just stay home for a while, or wear a mask, or do any of the other things that everyone seems to be doing now. And I do feel like I'm a little more mentally prepared than some of my close friends who are like freaking out about this. And, well, I've just gotten to this point in my life. Maybe it sounds a little fatalistic, I don't know, but that old saying of this too shall pass. And one of the things in my recovery plan, I love journaling. I'm a big fan of it. I've shared it with the audience before. However, we always get many new listeners. I'll just share it now. I always write on the right-hand side of the page, leave the left-hand side of the page blank, and then I go back. And the person who taught me this, it was very systematic, and went back monthly, and then at 6 months and a year, and wrote on the left-hand side of the page what had changed. And I think it's a great idea, because I'm not that systematic. I'll just go back, find a page that is blank, read it, and fill it in. Like, okay, put a new date on it so I can see, but it's not systematic. And what's helpful for me, not only in the journal, if a doctor says, well, how long has this been going on? I can kind of like pinpoint it. But also, I'm able to reflect back, like, oh, when I was doing X, wow, I was feeling so good. I was feeling so good that I quit doing it. Or vice versa. And so that's why I find being able to have a page on the left-hand side that I can fill in this too shall pass type of notations is so helpful for me to keep myself moving forward, keep myself in a positive, continuing to optimize mode.
Yeah, no, I don't think of it as fatalistic at all, actually. I think of it as a more positive way of dealing with things. At least for me, I had to go into this thinking that it would pass. I had to know that I would be better, get better, and be stronger, and be able to do things differently. I mean, there's certainly things I can't do because of my surgeries, and that's hard sometimes. I'm not going to pretend that it's not hard, but being positive and knowing that I would get past it, and knowing that I'd find a way, I think was the difference between having a recovery that actually works for me, that has brought me here in front of you. If I would have just, and I had days, believe me, I had some really difficult days, and I'm sure you did too, but I couldn't stay there. I knew if I stayed there, then it could consume me, and then you just lose all around. You have this disease or the surgery or whatever is going on with you at that moment. And you have this mindset that just keeps you down and negative. And I just chose to think, okay, I'll get past this and I'll make it work. And that's part of it for me in doing this, is just trying to find the meaning. You know, kind of like Viktor Frankl always talks about, you know, we're meaning makers, we human beings. And it's so important, you know, for me, my meaning is trying to help other people have a better experience and not go through some of the things I went through. And we all have our own journeys, but...
Well, we all have our own journeys, but that's why I started the show. Well, I started the show for two reasons. One was my own frustration in finding quality information. And when I found it, I wanted to share it. I was like, okay, that was a lot of research. If I could make it easier for people not to have to compile all of that together and find the answers. And also to build community. I think knowing that it doesn't make it easier exactly knowing I'm not alone, but it sure is a relief when I know I'm not alone. Recently, I had added a medical professional to my team, and as we were talking, the questions she asked me were not usual doctor questions. And finally, I interrupted and I said, I have a personal question to ask. And she said, okay. The questions you're asking me are not usual doctor questions. Do you or does someone in your life have an autoimmune condition? Because you're asking as if you've lived it. And she said she had the autoimmune condition. Now, not that I want that on anybody, but it was also like, oh, finally somebody will get me about not only the physical, but sometimes the mind games that autoimmune conditions can play on you. And it was finally somebody will understand the whole picture of it, that it's not just the physical manifestation. There's a lot more that goes with it.
No, I completely agree. There were times when I used to wish that my doctors had experience, particularly when I was in a lot of pain. I was like, oh, it'd be great. But then, you know, you don't wish that on anybody, not really. But just to have that experience, and also the experience of being in the room before the surgery, before anything happens, and that fear, it's kind of, as I said, there's a very big difference between being the person in the bed or the person experiencing the condition, as it were, and being the person alongside the bed or talking to you. You know, they don't know what it's like to live with it day in and day out and never get a break. And not knowing, I mean, that's one of the hard things with autoimmune conditions or any condition. You sometimes don't know day to day what you're going to feel like, and that lack of control. And, you know, that was one of the harder things for me, to give up control of you know, how I can manage my body. I still try, and my body says, no, sorry, it ain't happening today. But, you know, that's something that we do try to do. And, you know, and that's another thing that I think was a gift, learning to surrender to some degree.
How did you surrender? Or I'm assuming for me, it's a continual process. It's not like a win and a check in the win column and I'm done.
Yeah, no, it's obviously not like that. And honestly, it is kind of, you know, I didn't surrender easily. It was kind of like, okay, you know, you have your knee surgery. Okay, get over that, fine. Oh, your mom has cancer now. Okay, go home and deal with that. Oh, your hips are going, you know, and then I start taking better care of myself and I'm being a better daughter and all these things. But then, you know, I'm feeling better and then I start going back to some of my bad habits. And I sometimes feel like somebody was trying to tell me something, but then I get hit by a car and it's just like, okay, I got the lesson now. You can stop. It's okay. I got it.
Not that I'm laughing at you, dearly. I'm laughing with you because I can relate.
I think there's a lot of us who can. You know, we don't want to stop doing what we were doing, and it wasn't working. It clearly wasn't working on so many levels. But I was so used to it, and it was so comfortable, even though it wasn't really comfortable. And now I have a very different way of being and looking at the world, and I'd like to think I'm a better patient. And sometimes I say, you know, if I could go turn the clock back and, you know, have all of my original parts without the pain and my parents, I would. I mean, honestly, I would. But that said, I am a better person for it. I have so much more empathy. You know, I'm sure you know, you don't go through this stuff without understanding, the suffering that other people are going through. Obviously, it's not the same as yours. My experience isn't your experience, but I do know what it's like to go through something that you have no control over, and that's just not how you want your life to be, and you can't be the person you want to be at that moment. So we just have to let go. I had to let go, and there are gifts in that, without a doubt. I had much better relationships with my parents before they passed away. I have a better relationship with my body now, because these scars are not going away. Neither are the spots of white patches all over my body, and it had to be okay. I just had to let it be okay, because it's not changing.
Yeah. Now, one thing I appreciate about you, Andrea, the time we've gotten to know each other, is you have just a very wonderful, I'll call it humor, that you just kind of have. Has that always been part of you, or has that adapted as the health issues?
Oh, I had a lot of screw jokes after the surgery. I think it's been a coping mechanism for me probably my whole life. But it's definitely become a lot more vivid in the last few years. I sometimes say if I didn't have a sense of humor, I'd be in a padded room right now. It just, how do you deal with these things? Everyone has their own ways of dealing with these things. And for me, humor has been a big part of it. I just had to,
For
find.
me too, but I've sometimes found that my humor is sometimes self-directed, which is fine. I'm saying it because I'm fine with it. But what's fascinating is sometimes people who have not experienced anything in their life, it's been a gentle breeze for them, they don't know how to deal with it. It's almost as if the humor is, ooh, that's really very sad. Should I laugh at that? You admit your spots, and you have a name for your spots, and you're kind of like, ooh, I feel bad. I want to laugh, but I feel bad.
Again, it just is what it is, but I agree with you. I've had that experience too. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier too, when you want people to know and to see you fully, but you don't. And, I joke about it. Maybe in some ways it's so because I'm uncomfortable with it at times too. It's just the reality of it. I'm obviously not happy about what happened, but I have to deal with it. This is the body I've been given, and I have a choice on how I am in the world and who I am in the world. And of course, people who don't go through what either one of us have gone through, and your audience has gone through, will necessarily get the joke, and they might be uncomfortable with it. But, it's what I need to do to make it through my days. And hopefully people, I hope people will get the joke and hear it and understand that it's okay to laugh about it. Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, I never expected to be this person. And it just all happened so suddenly. And one on top of the other. And it could be anyone. So...
Absolutely. Yeah. We're down to just the last 3 minutes. Oh my gosh, Andrew, when you and I get together, we lose time. And tell everyone how to find out more about the digital patient and you, and any final thoughts.
To find me, I have actually 2 websites. One is thedigitalpatient.com, and that really was directed at trying to find ways as a patient to find better ways of dealing with the healthcare community, just seeing the digital side of things. And then most recently, I put up another website, AndreaJMiller.com, and that is more on the well-being side of things, because that has been as much a part of my journey, if not more of my journey, is finding ways to manage what's happened in the most positive way, sometimes with humor, sometimes very quietly, self-directed. So that's where I'm at. That's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Everyone, that's Andrea J. Miller, and she is the CEO of The Digital Patient. And I just love these sorts of opportunities where we can just share experiences and understand what each other's going through at a different level. And as much as I say it's kind of an odd thing to say, just know that we're not alone. So thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that we were able to meet a few months ago and be able to connect and share this time. Everyone, have a great week, whatever your adventures. Join me next week for another episode of the Autoimmune Hour. Enjoy.
The information provided on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, including the websites understandingautoimmune.com and lifeinterruptedradio.com, plus social media, is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio.
Hi, this is Sharon, and of course you know me from here on the Autoimmune Hour. Maybe you don't know I'm also an author. My latest book is for kids. It's Pinky Chenille and the Rainbow Hunters, a winner of a 5-star Reader's Favorite review. It's perfect for your early reader and a great bedtime story for your young adventurers. Check it out over at pinkychenille.com. That's PinkyChenille.com. See you there. Do you want to be a better leader? Have better relationships? Become more self-aware? Be a better communicator? Hi, I'm Sharon Sayler, best-selling author, professional speaker, and executive coach. And my life passion is empowering professionals to be the best that they can be. After years of working with professionals, I've discovered the 7 things nobody is telling you that can cost you your clients, sales, and even your career. And I want to give it to you free. You've heard my show, you know my passion, and maybe we'll be working together sooner rather than later. So go grab this ebook now to find out the 7 things that's costing you big time over at SharonSayler.com/radio gift.